Thanks, Joel. Now, there's a good chance that load shedding will affect your business. It's estimated planned power cuts could cost South Africa around 300 billion rands. For tips on ensuring that your business remains productive during rolling blackouts, let's talk to Jarrad Wright. He's a principal researcher at the CSIR. Good morning, Jarrad. Thank you so much for your time. Before we get into all your tips, could you just paint a picture of how much this major inconvenience has cost the country over the years? It's crazy to think that it's been 13 years.
Yeah, it has been a very long time, very unfortunate. First of all, thank you for the time and for the interview. It has been a long time. Load shedding seems to be perpetual and a continuous part of our lives, both in our households and in the businesses that are trying to operate in very difficult environments, especially during this last year of 2020, and then it looks like, at least going forward into 2021. It definitely has impacted the economy. We've estimated as CSIR some impacts on the economy and the cost to the economy as a result of it. But indeed, 2020 was one of the worst years of load shedding that we have seen thus far. So far as well into 2021, already in the first few weeks, it seems like it's not looking good and might even be worse than 2020.
And I can also just imagine, Jarrad, that with so many people now working from home, that it poses even more of a challenge.
Indeed, it does. And you could also start to argue, well, perhaps there's a case to be made for households to now start to operate almost as small businesses in and of themselves and start to invest in, I guess, their own self-supply options, looking at the way that they use energy in the household more carefully, because it is effectively now becoming a small business where either one or two parents in the household are having to work continuously from home. It might become perpetual and more long-term.
Yeah.
It might not as well. It might shift, but it's an interesting outcome of the lockdown that we have had as a result of COVID-19. And perhaps a return to normal might not be the normal that we normally used to, and perhaps just a new normal.
All right, let's get into those tips, Jarrad. How can businesses do their best to survive load shedding?
Well, businesses indeed have quite a few options available to them. They can obviously start to think about ways in which they can self-supply their own needs. Backup generator sets are common. There are obviously concerns around the way that these are installed. You have to make sure it's done safely and aligned with all of these standards and protocols. Similarly, a lot of businesses, and let's call them small businesses these days in households, are starting to install rooftop solar PV, perhaps with some battery backup storage. The real problem, though, that comes with this is it's very capital intensive. It costs a lot of money up front. But the long term is actually a good move if you scale it and if you design it and size it right. You definitely don't want to be moving away from the grid, at least not yet. It is a cheaper option in the long term. It really is just something around adequacy and the concerns around how the grid is unstable. Therefore, the installation of your self-supply options with the ability to back up yourself for just a small amount of time, if it's just 2 to 3 or 4 hours at a time when you are load shed per day, are becoming really attractive to a lot of businesses as well as households to do this.
Yeah.
It's really something that's ramped up in 2020.
And how do you plan for working offline when that load shedding does hit?
Yeah, so the best thing that I've found personally is really just trying to make 1 or 2 rooms in the household resilient. So you don't need to back up your entire house. If you can, of course. Why not? But for the most part, if you want to try and make at least one component of your household resilient, that really can help. And if that's a small home office, if that is one area of the household that's used quite often, if children are also at home, if they're not back at school, for example, for extended periods, then you can ride through those brief periods where it's just 2 to 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Similarly, for businesses have already been doing this for quite a long time, especially big businesses. The smaller businesses, it's quite difficult though, because they are quite constrained. A lot of businesses, unfortunately, have also been closed for extended periods during the lockdown. So it's not to say that cash or capital is necessarily available then to invest in new options. So it's a bit of a difficult one in terms of prioritization of that.
Yeah, so it is mostly then about long-term planning.
Yes, indeed. And you really need to be looking more towards the next 3 to 5 years and beyond. We would hope, according to a lot of the outlooks that are coming out from Eskom, that it will be improving. The Eskom CEO last year said that 12 to 18 months we should be fine, which is towards the end of this year. The year hasn't started well, though, and the outlook for the next 12 weeks also does not look very good. So that's something that people would need to keep in mind, but also just think about the longer term, more towards the middle of the decade and beyond, to see and hopefully that all of the interventions that are being made at a national level to make sure that the system is adequate, that the power system is adequate, will then come online as expected. But it does take time. There are a lot of processes involved in procuring the capacity that needs to come online. The DMRE are running a risk mitigation program to try and get capacity online as fast as possible. But in the interim, it's definitely something that a lot of businesses are carefully considering and trying to self-supply a lot of their energy needs, at least electrical energy needs, as they just can't wait. They do need to operate, and they need continuous operations in order to make the business work.
Yeah, future in terms of load shedding is certainly not looking very good. Thank you for all the tips, Jarrad. That was Jarrad Wright, Principal Researcher at CSIR.